I was still wearing my shoes when I scratched the numbers. The groceries were half unpacked. A bag of lentils balanced on the sink. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I just stared at the ticket in the slanted afternoon light. The truth of it, settling in quietly like dust. $120 million. I folded it, tucked it between the pages of a Lorraine Hansberry novel, and made dinner. That evening, Lorraine stirred soup while I pressed cornbread into a tin. I watched her hum to herself. Oblivious. I thought about telling her, opening the pantry and pulling out the novel like a magic trick. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe I just wanted one thing in this life that nobody could interpret. Dilute. Or decide for me. The next morning, I went to the claims office alone. I told them I wanted everything anonymous and airtight. I signed papers, chose slow disbursements, and asked for silence. Then I walked home and picked up Julian from school. I never touched the money. Not really. We stayed in our bungalow on Eleanor Street. I kept teaching English at the community college. And Lorraine kept volunteering at the library, even when her knees gave her trouble. We replaced the roof one year, but only because it leaked. I clipped coupons. I wore the same wool coat every winter. Nobody ever asked why. I told myself I was saving it for Julian, for his wedding, maybe his future family. It felt noble at the time, holding back, waiting for the right moment to give everything. Then Lorraine got sick, the kind of sick that comes fast and doesn't negotiate. And still, I didn't touch a cent. By the time we buried her, spring was just beginning to push out of the cold. I sat on the porch afterward, alone, watching the forsythia bloom. The money was still there, still untouched, still waiting for a purpose that no longer felt certain. 2 weeks later, Julian called. He had news. He was bringing someone home. Julian called on a Sunday, just like always. But this time, his voice held something different, quick, excited, slightly rehearsed. "Mom, I want you to meet someone." I set the phone down on speaker and folded laundry while he talked. Her name was Bryn Ashford, MBA candidate. Her father ran something called a legacy fund. Julian said the words like they were credentials on a resume, not pieces of a person. "She's amazing, really. And we're getting married." I paused mid-fold, holding one of Lorraine's old cardigans. "Married," he laughed. "Yeah, I wanted you to be the first to know. We're coming down next weekend. I think you'll love her." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm sure I will." Bryn arrived wearing pearl studs and a tailored blazer, though it was warm enough for linen. She shook my hand with the confidence of someone used to being introduced. Her gaze moved around the living room like she was cataloging it. "I love how charming this space is," she said. "So, lived in. The bookshelves feel almost vintage." I poured tea. She declined sugar. Julian sat straighter than usual, like he was being graded on posture. When I asked him about the clinic, he said it was great exposure for future partnerships. Exposure. Partnerships. I remembered when he used to say things like, "We helped a kid walk again today." Now he spoke in abstract nouns and buzzwords. Bryn crossed her legs and asked about my pre-retirement industry. When I said I'd taught literature, she nodded politely. "So valuable storytelling is essential to branding now." She didn't mean harm. Not exactly. But there was a distance in every word, like she'd learned my world as a case study. Julian never noticed. He kept smiling, hands folded like he was waiting for approval. That night, after they left, I stood in the hallway and stared at our photo wall. Julian, missing his front teeth. Julian, in his white coat. I ran my finger along the wooden frame. The boy I'd raised had come home, but he'd brought someone else's language with him. The Ashford's estate sat behind iron gates that opened with a keypad code. Their home was the kind of place where doormats didn't dare show where the hedges were trimmed like they'd been interviewed first. Julian and Bryn had insisted I join them for a family welcome dinner. I wore my navy skirt and Lorraine's brooch, the one with the pressed daisy behind glass. Catherine Ashford greeted me with a glass of Prosecco and a comment about how charming Julian's upbringing must have been. She pronounced the word like it belonged to a period piece. Grounded young men are so rare these days, she added, tapping her flute gently against mine. You must have done your best with what you had. I smiled and sipped. The dining room was cathedral quiet, lit by a chandelier the size of my kitchen table. We were joined by 2 board members from Bryn's father's firm. Graham made the introductions, then turned to me with a grin that didn't quite touch his eyes. So, Selena, do you still keep busy since retiring from… Was it education? Yes. Literature? Ah, that's lovely. So important to stay mentally active. I wondered if he realized he'd just spoken to me like a patient recovering from a stroke. Dinner came in courses: heirloom tomatoes with sea salt flakes, lamb medallions over truffle mash. Conversation floated around hedge fund restructuring, university endowments, legacy placements. Julian nodded along. Bryn beamed. I listened and passed the salt when asked. I caught Julian's eye once across the table. I tried to smile, to bridge the space between us, but he looked away too quickly, answering a question about research grants. Later, over dessert, Catherine leaned toward me and said in a hush, "It's so wonderful that Julian's been able to rise above well. You know, it speaks volumes about his drive." I looked down at my plate. The creme brulee was cooling, the sugar skin untouched. "Julian's always known his worth," I said softly. "The question is whether others see it without needing it explained." On the ride home, I sat silent beside my son in the back seat, the city lights flickering through tinted glass. He looked tired. Or maybe he didn't want to meet my eyes. The day after the dinner, I opened the closet in the guest room, Lorraine's closet, and pulled down the old cedar box we used to call the someday chest. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and paper. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a memory that felt unbent by time. I found the envelope at the bottom, tucked behind a faded folder of Julian's grade school drawings. My name was on the front in Lorraine's hand, careful, slanted, and unmistakably hers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, the creases soft with age. The first line made me sit down on the edge of the bed. "Selena, if you're reading this, I've gone first. I hope it was gentle." She wrote that she'd known about the lottery win, knew the day it happened, knew the way I moved that night, quieter than usual, knew I kept secrets not out of distrust, but discipline. "You didn't tell me because you wanted to protect something. I admired that, but I still made a plan. I hope you'll understand." She outlined her vision in gentle detail: a scholarship foundation. Not just money, but mentorship for students like Julian. Once was bright, hungry, and invisible. Kids who worked jobs after school and still got top grades. Kids nobody remembered when the awards were handed out. She'd even chosen a name, the Lorraine and Selena Moreau Foundation, because we did this life together. And even now, I want that to continue. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the quiet fill the room. It wasn't just a plan, it was a mirror, a reminder that all this time, the money had been waiting not just for my son's future, but for something bigger than any single wedding or inheritance. When I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, I knew what I had to do next. I spent the next few days running numbers in my notebook, not because I needed to, but because it felt grounding. I looked at the trust balance, the projected growth, the cash accounts I'd never touched. I imagined writing a check to Julian as a wedding gift, something symbolic, something generous, something final. It had always been the plan, but the plan assumed respect. Bryn invited me to a planning session at the Ashford's home. She called it a working brunch. There were printouts, fabric swatches, and a seating chart in a gold frame. I showed up with lemon scones and a smile. We talked flowers, catering, and speeches. I listened more than I spoke. When the topic turned to table assignments, Catherine pointed to a name tag labeled Mother of the Groom. Now, Selena, we've placed you at table 9, she said sweetly, tapping the chart. You'll be with Graham's business partners' wives. Lovely women, very refined. That way you won't feel too out of place. I blinked once. Table 9. Oh yes. Bryn chimed in. Closer to the terrace. Quieter. Intimate. I looked to Julian. He was flipping through the menu draft. He didn't lift his eyes. He didn't say a word. I thought about Lorraine's letter sitting in my purse, about the foundation, about the silent elegance of putting your name on something that grows beyond you. I folded my napkin slowly and laid it across my lap, smoothing it with both hands. Table 9. There was once a time I would have written a check anyway, told myself that generosity was enough, that love and money could live separately. But watching my son shrink to keep someone else comfortable, I realized something else. Love without dignity rots in the gut. When brunch ended, I left the scones on the counter and thanked them for including me. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. That evening, I took out my notebook, crossed out Julian, wedding gift, and wrote a single line below it. Hold the line. The rehearsal dinner was held at a boutique restaurant downtown. Marble floors, mirrored walls, and servers in black aprons who moved like shadows. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. The hostess barely glanced at my name before leading me to the reserved room. Julian's mother, from out of town, Catherine announced when I stepped inside, waving her hand like she was introducing the florist. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Bryn's friends offered thin smiles, then returned to their phones. One of them, Delaney or Delia, gestured toward my shoes and asked if they were vintage. I said no, they were just old. A server brushed past me with a tray of champagne. Staff entrance is to the left, he said quietly, nodding toward the kitchen. I looked down at my black dress and gray cardigan. I didn't correct him. Bryn didn't either. She was too busy adjusting the centerpiece. Julian caught my eye and gave a small wave. He was seated between Catherine and Graham, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I didn't wave back. I just found my seat, far corner, beneath an air vent, and asked for tea. The room buzzed with conversations about honeymoons and homes in the Berkshires. I drank my tea slowly, listening to the hum of a world I no longer recognized. When someone mentioned the price of the cake, I thought of the one Lorraine and I had made for Julian's 5th birthday, a crooked dinosaur covered in too much green frosting. Dinner was served. Toasts followed. Bryn's brother made a joke about how Julian had the heart of a teacher, but finally upgraded to a better bracket. I sipped my tea, steady and quiet, and I said nothing at all. The next day, I dressed in the same cardigan, and I went to the wedding. The ballroom smelled like roses and money. Strings played something slow and soaring while guests drifted to their assigned tables. Each place setting marked with calligraphy and gold-rimmed menus. Mine read, Table 14. I found it near the kitchen doors, tucked behind a marble column. The chairs wobbled slightly on the edge of the carpet. I was seated between a florist's assistant who kept checking her watch and a nervous intern from Graham's firm who thought I was someone's great aunt. They talked around me, not to me, and that was fine. I'd come for Julian. I watched him glide between tables in his tailored tuxedo, shaking hands, hugging Bryn's cousins. thanking Graham's associates like they were family. Catherine beamed beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm, the other clutching her champagne. The toast came just before dessert. Julian took the mic with a gentle smile, thanked everyone for coming, said how grateful he was to join the Ashford family. He spoke about their generosity, their values, their incredible welcome. He raised his glass to Catherine and Graham. They toasted him back. There was no mention of Lorraine, no mention of me. The room applauded. Someone dabbed at tears. I stared down at the edge of my plate and thought of the letter still folded in my purse, of the money untouched for 2 decades, of the cake I once stayed up all night baking in a kitchen without air conditioning. I stood quietly and walked out the side door. Outside, the air was thick with early summer heat. I walked toward the edge of the terrace and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint behind the lights of the city, but I knew where they should be. I counted them anyway. Behind me, the band started to play again. A cheerful, glittering tune for people who hadn't noticed I was gone. I reached into my bag and touched the corner of Lorraine's envelope. It felt heavier than before, not with guilt, but with certainty. I stood outside for a long while, listening to the distant music rise and fall like the hum of a machine I no longer belonged to. Then I turned, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and walked back through the side doors. The ballroom was awash in gold and candlelight. They were halfway through the cake-cutting speech. Catherine had the microphone. Bryn stood at her side, smiling like a statue. Julian, a few steps behind them, clapped politely as she spoke of legacies and bright futures. I stepped forward, moving slowly enough to be noticed but not rushed. I passed the tables, one by one, until I stood near the stage. "Excuse me," I said. The microphone wavered. Catherine turned. So did Bryn. Julian looked confused. "Just a moment." I said again, "I'd like to say something." There was no music now. No one moved. Even the servers froze mid-step. I cleared my throat. 20 years ago, I won $120 million. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't change our house or my job, or the way I raised my son. I kept it quiet for him, because I wanted to see who he'd become without it. A murmur ran through the room like wind through dry leaves. I believed in building things with your own hands, in dignity, in modesty. I saved that money, thinking I would give it to him one day, as a gift, a dowry of love and trust. I looked at Julian. His mouth parted, but no words came. But tonight, I saw something clearly. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And I've seen how easily it disappears when no one's watching. Bryn's glass trembled slightly. Graham sat still as stone. Catherine blinked slowly, like she hadn't understood the language. I folded the small envelope in my hand, held it once at my chest, then returned it to my purse. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I just needed to say it to myself, most of all. Then I stepped down from the stage, past the tables once more, and walked toward the exit. I was nearly to my car when I heard the door open behind me. "Mom, wait." I didn't turn. I waited. Julian's footsteps slowed as he reached me, the silence between us thick enough to press against. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked. I faced him. The tie he wore was slightly crooked now. His jacket hung open, wrinkled from sitting. He looked younger than he had at the altar. Younger, and somehow smaller, because I needed to see who you'd become without it. He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. "I never would have you let them seat me at the back," I said. Not harshly, just plainly. "You watched me disappear." He looked down. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to cause a scene. "You didn't have to cause a scene. You only had to look me in the eye." The air smelled faintly of peonies and pavement. Somewhere inside, someone laughed too loudly. A toast was still going on. I reached into my purse and pulled out Lorraine's letter. Your mother knew. She had plans. Not for yachts or stocks. She wanted a foundation, something that would matter. I placed the envelope in his hand. He didn't look at it, just held it like it burned. I thought you were saving it for me, he said quietly. I was. But not anymore. Not like this. He nodded slowly, tears brimming now. What do I do? You figure out whether you want to be the man we raised, or the man they applaud. I stepped closer, touched his cheek the way I used to after nightmares. You're not a bad man, Julian, but you forgot who you were. That's a dangerous kind of forgetting. His voice was barely a whisper. Am I too late? I looked at him, not the suit, not the watch, not the borrowed confidence, but the boy underneath it all. You're not ready, I said. Not yet. Then I opened the car door, sat behind the wheel, and let the engine turn over beneath my hands. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft scratch of my pen. I signed the last page, dated it, and slid the folder closed. The Lorraine and Selena Moreau Foundation. It was official now. Funded. Structured. Built to last longer than grief. Longer than silence. I'd worked with a small firm, nothing flashy. A local attorney. An accountant I'd known since my teaching days. We spent weeks sketching out the details. Full scholarships for underrepresented students, first-generation college hopefuls. Future teachers. Engineers, nurses. Students like Julian had once been. Before suits and speeches and rooms that bowed to money, the foundation would cover tuition, books, mentorship, and every student would receive a letter with Lorraine's words, "You matter not for what you own, but for what you dare to become." I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table. The same spot where Julian once read his spelling lists out loud, where Lorraine used to correct her students' essays by hand. The light coming through the window was soft. Morning had taken its time. Julian hadn't called. Not yet. I didn't expect him to. It would take time to unlearn the things he'd started to believe were true, but I had time. He would come around. I knew that. He wasn't lost. Just misdirected following signs someone else had planted in front of him. When he found his way back, this foundation would still be here, not as a gift, but as an invitation. He'd have to earn his place in it. I took another sip of tea and looked out at the garden, where Lorraine used to grow marigolds along the fence. The beds were empty now, but I could still picture the gold against the wood, bright and stubborn. There are different kinds of wealth. Some bloom quietly. Some take root. I opened the next folder, a list of schools we'd partner with. Deadlines. Outreach contacts. Notes in the margin I'd scribbled late at night. The work had only just begun. And for the first time in months, I felt more than clear. I felt ready.